The hymn goes as follows. Long my imprisoned spirit lay, fast bound by sin and nature's night. Thine eye diffused a quickening ray. I woke, the dungeon flamed with light. My chains fell off, my heart was free. I rose, went forth, and followed thee. That was pretty. The reader may find some difficulty in realizing the immense contemporary importance of the religious problem, which Peter Bollier had helped the Wesley brothers to solve. To put faith before works implied a total reorientation of their religious position, as radical as the change from political conservatism to communism would be today. So this is a little bit tough to understand, for me at least. So I'm getting here that Peter Bollier helped the two evangelist brothers, the Wesley brothers, solve a problem. And the problem was to put faith before action. So the faith had to be first. Okay, so I'm gonna use Gemini in order to get more understanding of what is being said. So now we got this here. Copy. Gemini is, I'm not over how amazing it is to rephrase. So what we are rephrasing is the part that says, the reader may find difficulty in realizing the immense, and this is what it says. Oh shit, give me 1 second. Hurry. 115. So this is what Gemini is rephrasing it to. It says, it might be hard for people today to understand how important figuring out religion was for Peter Bollier and the Wesley brothers. They have to completely change how they thought about religion. It was like someone going from being very conservative to being a communist. A huge shift in their beliefs. Let me read it again because I don't have it clear even like that. I think I need to give Gemini more context. So it says, the reader may find some difficulty in realizing the immense contemporary importance of the religious problem which Peter Bollier had helped the Wesley brothers to solve. Okay? To put faith before works implied a total reorientation of the religious position. Okay? As radical as the change from political conservatism to communism would be today. Okay, I get it. So even though I still need a little bit more context to completely understand, I'm getting it, what it's saying. I understand. So it's just saying, it's just wording out how insane the religious problem they had is to change. That it would be from going from conservatism to communism. So that was an analogy. Okay, I get it. Whew. Okay, so now, once habituated to the new pattern of thought, John Wesley set about implanting it in others. Okay. With the help of his brother Charles, whose hymns were addressed to the religious emotion rather than the intelligence, he hit upon an extremely effective technique of conversion. A technique which is used not only in many other successful religions, but in modern political warfare. First of all, Wesley would create high emotional tension in his potential converts. He found it easy to convince large audiences of that period that a failure to achieve salvation would necessarily condemn them to hell life forever and ever. The immediate acceptance of an escape from such a ghastly fate was then very strongly urged on the ground that anybody who left the meeting unchanged and met with sudden fatal accident before he had accepted his salvation would pass straight into the fiery furnace. This is intense. This sense of urgency increased the prevailing anxiety, which, as suggestibility increased, could infect the whole group. Excuse me. Fear of everlasting hell, which was as real to Wesley's own mind as the houses and fields in which he preached, affected the nervous system of his hearers very much as fear of death by drowning did Pavlov's dogs in the Leningrad flood. How do you pronounce that? Leningrad. Monsignor Ronald Knox quotes this autobiographical account from John Nelson, later one of Wesley's most able lieutenants, describing his own conversion. And this is the description. As soon as he, referring to Wesley, got upon his stand, he stroked back his hair and turned his face towards me, where I stood, and I thought, fixed his eyes upon me. His countenance struck such an awful dread upon me before I heard him speak that it made my heart beat like the pendulum of a clock. And when he did speak, I thought his whole discourse was aimed at me. Wesley learned in time that to capture an audience, he had first to gauge its intellectual and emotional capacity. He reports that on tour of Ireland in 1765, he reports that on a tour of Ireland in 1765. Accentuation is so difficult to get right sometimes. Like, you have to understand the sentence first, and then you have to read it to understand where you're supposed to accentuate the pronunciation. All right, so this is a report from Wesley's tour of Ireland in 1765. I rode to Waterford and preached in a little court on our great high priest that is passed into the heavens for us. But I soon found I was God above most of my hearers. I should have spoken of death or judgment. On Tuesday evening, I suited my discourse to my audience, and deep attention sat on almost every face. He fills his journal with day-to-day notes on the results of his preaching, for example. While I was speaking, one before me dropped down as dead, and presently a second and third. 5 others sunk down in half an hour, most of whom were in violent agonies. The pains as of hell came about them. The snares of death overtook them. In their trouble we called upon the Lord, and he gave us an answer of peace. One indeed continued an hour in strong pain, and 1 or 2 more for 3 days. But the rest were greatly comforted in that hour, and went away rejoicing and praising God. Wesley also reports, about 10 in the morning, J.C., as she was sitting at work, was suddenly seized with grievous terrors of mind, attended with strong trembling. Thus she continued all the afternoon. But at the society in the evening, God turned her heaviness into joy. 5 or 6 others were also cut to the heart this day, and soon after found him whose hands made whole, as did one likewise, who had been mourning many months without any to comfort her. This took place at Bristol, but in Newgate prison, where many who heard him preach were soon due to die by public hanging. His message was not unnaturally even more effective. Immediately, one and another sunk to the earth. They dropped on every side as thunderstruck. One of them cried aloud, "We besought." What is besought? I have no idea what that word means. Let me see. That's a new word for me. Also, I am not really understanding many things that are being said in this page. So I'm going to rephrase the whole page to Gemini. Let's see. Oh, besought. Besought is the past tense and past participle of the verb beseech. What the fuck is that? Beseech means to ask for or request earnestly and urgently. It implies a strong desire and often a sense of desperation or humility. The starving villagers besought the king for mercy. Okay, that works. Essentially, besought describes an act of pleading or imploring with great fervor. Okay, besought. We besought God in her behalf. Okay, so we looked with urgency or something along those lines. With great fervor. We besought God in her behalf, and he turned her heaviness into joy. A second being in the same agony, we called upon God for her also, and he spoke peace into her soul. One was so wounded by the sword of the Spirit that you would have imagined she could not live a moment. But immediately his abundant kindness was shown, and she loudly sang of his righteousness. With such preaching methods, it is not enough to disrupt previous patterns of behavior by emotional assaults on the brain. One must also provide an escape from the induced mental illness, from the induced mental stress. Hellfire is presented only as the result of rejoicing. Hellfire is presented only as the result of rejecting the offer of eternal salvation won by faith. I'm sorry, it's coffee and it's feeling like hot. There we go. Okay. Emotionally disrupted by this threat and then rescued from everlasting torment by a total change of heart. The convert is now in a state to be helped by dwelling upon the complementary gospel of love. The punishment for backsliding from a state of grace must always be kept in mind. But once conversion has taken place, love rather than fear can be used to consolidate the gain. On December 20th, 1751, Wesley wrote, "I think the right method for preaching is this." This is going to be really important. Listen. At first, beginning to preach at any place, after a general declaration of the love of God to sinners and his willingness that they should be saved, to preach the law in the strongest, the closest, the most searching manner possible. After more and more persons are convinced of sin, we may mix more and more of the gospel in order to beget faith, to rise into spiritual life. Those whom the law hath slain. I would not advise to preach the law without the gospel any more than the gospel without the law. Undoubtedly, both should be preached in their turns. Yeah, both at once or both in one. All the conditional promises are instances of this. They are law and gospel mixed together. So, before this, we're going to get to a really, really important part. So, I am going to put everything on Gemini so we can get a rephrasing. Because even though I understand what this is saying, I want to understand it better. So, I'm gonna rephrase page 82 and 83. I'm actually going to do page 80, 81. So this is going to be a summary of the last 3 pages, all right? First, John Nelson's conversion. John Nelson describes how Wesley's powerful presence and preaching deeply impacted him. He felt intensely focused on by Wesley and experienced a profound sense of awe and fear. Okay, I did get that. The next one. Wesley understood the importance of connecting with his audience. In Ireland, he realized his message was too complex for some and adjusted his preachings to suit them. Okay. Next, Wesley kept detailed records of his preaching, including instances where people experienced intense emotional reactions, such as fear and distress. During his sermons, he believed these experiences were signs of God's work in their lives. Wow. Wesley's preaching style. Wesley's preaching often involved emphasizing the consequences of sin and the threat of eternal damnation to create a sense of urgency and fear in his listeners. However, he always offered a way out of this distress, accepting Jesus Christ and experiencing salvation. This approach aimed to emotionally disrupt people's lives and then offer them a new path through faith and a newfound relationship with God. Okay, Wesley's preaching method. Wesley believed in a balanced approach to preaching, combining the law, which is the understanding of sin and its consequences, with the gospel, which is the message of God's love and salvation. Wesley emphasized that these two aspects should be presented together as they are interconnected. Key points. Wesley's preaching style was highly emotional and aimed to deeply impact his listeners. Wesley believed that experiencing fear and distress could be a necessary step towards spiritual transformation. And his goal was to guide people away from sin and towards a life of faith and love. Okay, so what's next is the analysis of the Gospels and political brainwashing. So listen up. Political brainwashing similarly points to a new path to salvation after fear, anger, and other strong emotions have been excited as a means of disrupting the old bourgeois thought patterns. I know that's French, I think, but I need to know how to say it. Bourgeois. So the word bourgeois has few different meanings depending on the context. It can mean middle class. It can refer to the members of the middle class, typically those who are financially comfortable and have a certain level of social status. The definition is often used in a neutral way. Conventional and materialistic. It can have a more negative connotation, suggesting someone who is overly concerned with wealth, social standing, and traditional values. This usage often implies a lack of creativity and open-mindedness. Bourgeois. And the third one is capitalist. In Marxist theory, the bourgeoisie refers to the class of people who own the means of production and exploit the working class. This definition is often used in a political or economic context. Also, you can use it to say like ostentatious. Also, like the middle class thought patterns. I forgot how to pronounce it. Bourgeois. That's cool. That's interesting. Bourgeois. Cool. The old bourgeois. My French is awful. Anyways, the old bourgeois thought pattern. If the communist gospel is accepted, love may also be substituted for fear. But severe penalties of relapse await deviationist backsliders. Deviationist backslider is someone who goes back on their promise or whatever, who deviates. That almost sounds offensive. You're such a deviationist backslider. Fuck. That sounds fucking awful. Alright, so as part of those experimental findings in dogs and experiences in the treatment of war neurosis would lead to expect the effect of getting too emotionally involved, either positively or negatively, with Wesley's preaching was to increase markedly the likelihood of being converted. It often happened quite unexpectedly for the person concerned, that when he had been roused to the greatest pitch of indignation and anger by the proceedings, he suddenly broke down and accepted every belief demanded of him. For it has been shown in previous chapters that, listen, anger as well as fear can induce disturbances of brain function, which make a person highly suggestible and reverse his conditioned behavior patterns or even wipe the cortical slate clean. Dude, that's fucking insane. That's fucking crazy. Fuck. The first that was deeply touched was L.W., whose mother had been not a little displeased a day or two before when she was told how her daughter had exposed herself before all the congregation. The mother herself was the next who dropped down and lost her senses in a moment, but went home with her daughter, full of joy, as did most of those that had been in pain. Wow. And on Friday, June 15th of 1739, he had also reported, some sunk down and there remained no strength in them. Others exceedingly trembled and quaked. Some were torn with a kind of convulsive notion in every part of their bodies, and that so violently that often 4 or 5 persons could not hold one of them. I have seen many hysterical and many epileptic fits, but none of them were like these in many respects. I immediately prayed that God would not suffer those who were weak to be offended. But one woman was offended greatly, being sure they might help it if they would. No one should persuade her to the contrary, and was got 3 or 4 yards when she also dropped down, and as violent in agony as the rest. So I guess preachers have like a journal of how people react. That's an insight that I never even thought about. Like ministers probably record how the people are reacting to their preachings. That's wild, isn't it? I've never even thought about a father fucking jotting down if people went wild or how they reacted, or if they feel fear or something. It sounds like the people in these times, these evangelists, had a more mechanistic, a more almost like a sermon performance system. Like they actually have to prepare it. This is so fucking interesting. Again, on July 30th, 1739, it says the following. One of these had been remarkably zealous against those who had cried out and made a noise, being sure that any of them might help it if they would. And the same opinion she was in still, till the moment she was struck through as with a sword and fell trembling to the ground. She then cried out loud, although not articulately, her words being swallowed up. In this pain she continued 12 or 14 hours, and then her soul was set at liberty. Those are a lot of fucking hours, holy shit. These phenomena were commonest when Wesley first began preaching after his own conversion. And when he addressed congregations unused to his methods, but he was recording them more than 30 years later, still convinced that to be effective, sanctification should be sudden and dramatic. He had originally rejected this theory when made by Peter Bollier, but on the rereading, his New Testament found that the effective conversions reported in it had, in fact, been sudden ones. Okay, I heard the word testament a lot. What the fuck does it even mean? I don't know what the word testament means. I have an idea, I'm not sure. So let's see. So testament, a statement of belief. This is the most common usage. It refers to formal declaration of faith or a strong expression of conviction. Okay, a statement of belief. A legal document. In this context, a testament is a will, which is a legal document that outlines how a person's property and assets should be distributed after their death. Okay, part of the Bible. Bible is divided into two main parts: the Old Testament and the New Testament. These terms refer to covenants between God and humanity. Wesley took the trouble to check his results scientifically. So this is what he said. In London alone, I found 652 members of our society who were exceedingly clear in their experience, and those whose testimony I could see no reason to doubt. And every one of these, without a single exception, has declared that his deliverance from sin was instantaneous, that the change was wrought in a moment. Had half of these, or 1/3, or 1 in 20 declared, it was gradually wrought in them, I should have believed this with regard to them, and thought that some were gradually sanctified, and some instantaneously. But as I have not found in so long a space of time a single person speaking thus, I cannot but believe that sanctification is commonly, if not always, an instantaneous work. Wow. This did not mean, of course, that a period of intense anxiety, depression, self-questioning, and indecision, often enhanced by physical debilitation due to a variety of causes, had not preceded the sanctification. Such softening up processes can all contribute to the disturbances of brain function, which occur when stresses become too great and a protective mechanism starts to come into play. Wesley's appeal was most successfully made to the poor and uneducated, but we find him reporting in 1742. I could not but observe that here the very best people, so-called, were as deeply convinced as open sinners. Several of these were now constrained to roar aloud for the disquietness of their hearts, and these generally not young, as in most other places, but neither middle-aged or well-stricken in years. I'm gonna rephrase that. Again, like I told you, I'm Mexican, and English is my second language. I'm ESL, fool. I'm ESL, ninjas. So I am using Gemini again to simplify this. I understand what it means, but it's not like solidly understood. So this is rephrasing complex text. I noticed that even the most respected and influential people in this place held the same strong beliefs as those openly expressing radical views. Some of these influential individuals were now compelled to publicly express their inner turmoil and distress. Interestingly, these individuals were not typically young, as seen elsewhere, but rather middle-aged or elderly. Okay, so I'm gonna keep reading more. That's pretty much saying that even more influential people is people who, the best people, were as deeply convicted as like open sinners, like drunks and whores. I shouldn't be calling myself a whore. Okay. In 1758, a powerful revival started at Everton. Cambridgeshire farm workers are by no means an easily excited group, but the Reverend John Burridge had also stumbled on the basic mechanics of sudden conversion process. Though accused by his religious detractors at the nearby Cambridge University of exhorting his audience to fall. Won't you fall? Why don't you fall? Better fall here than fall into hell. I did not mean to sound like that. Why don't you fall? He had no hesitation in inducing the final state of collapse in his converts, for the number of groaners, siders, tumblers, and convulsionists also caused dismay at the university. In Simon, Simeon, and church order, Charles Smith with a Y, reports him as writing. And now let me make one reflection. I preached of sanctification very earnestly for 6 years in a former parish, and never brought one soul to Christ. I did the same at this parish for 2 years without any success at all. But as soon as ever I preached Jesus Christ and faith in his blood, then believers were added to the church continually. Then people flocked from all parts to hear the glorious sound of the gospel, some coming 6 miles, others 8, and others 10. And that constantly, Berich told them very plainly that they were children of wrath and under the curse of God, though they knew it not, laboring to beat down self-righteousness, laboring to show them that they were all in a lost and perishing state, and that nothing could recover them out of this state and make them children of God but faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Wow. By this method, Southey writes, this man produced a more violent influenza of fanaticism than had ever followed upon Whitfield's or Wesley's preachings. Some persons tend to minimize the importance of psychological factors, emotional doubts, physical debilitation, and the like in religious conversions, and to emphasize them when excusing the victims of similarly induced political conversion. But successful brainwashing also demands the arousing of strong emotions, and these need not have any particular relevance to the new faith, provided that they are sufficiently disruptive. For example, Arthur Koestler's arrow in the blue describes his conversion to militant communism in these words. Though I had been steadily moving towards the communism position for more than a year, the final decision to become an actual member of the party was again a sudden one. This time, the event that clinched the issue was of a more profane nature. More precisely, it was a whole series of grotesque events crowded into one December evening in 1931. Koestler goes on to explain how one Saturday afternoon he went to fetch his car from a garage where it had been under repair for nearly 3 weeks. Ugh, that sounds fucking awful. Delighted to get it back, he drove straight from the garage to a friend's flat where a poker party was in progress. Koestler loved poker and was not too expert at it, but seldom lost heavily. That afternoon, however, he lost the equivalent of several months' salary, far more than he could afford. Dejected, I drove to an after-dinner party of the radical Bohemia, where I promptly got drunk, as under the circumstances was only to be expected. The party lasted till 2 or 3 in the morning, and I paid no attention to the fact that it had turned very cold and that I had no antifreeze in my radiator. When I left, the engine block of the newly repaired car had burst and a thick icicle was sticking out of one of the cylinder heads. A sight to make any motorist weep, even if the car was not his own. More trouble was still to come. On seeing my dismay, a girl who had been at the party, and who had always got on my nerves, offered me the hospitality of her nearby flat. This again leading to the consequences which were to be expected. He pounded some punani. I woke up in the morning with a super hangover mixed with self-reproach, anxiety, and guilt next to a person whom I disliked, financially broke, and with a burst-up car. That sounds fucking awful. Koestler comments, in my experiences, the language of destiny is often couched in vulgar slang. The series of grotesque misadventures on that Saturday night looked as if they had been arranged by a crude gesture, but the face of a clown bending close against your own can be very frightening. By the time I got back to the flat, my decision was made. Though I hardly felt it to be mine, it had made itself. Pacing up and down in my bedroom, I had the sudden impression that I was looking down from a height at the track along which I had been running. I saw myself with great clarity as a sham and a phony, paying lip service to the revolution which was to lift the earth from its axis, and at the time which leading the existence of a bourgeois, careerist, climbing the worm-eaten ladder of success, playing poker and landing in unsought bets. So as of this point, I am hating having to use Gemini because the editing is going to take a lot longer. But, I'm doing this for you guys. So subscribe, okay? Because even though not many of you will go this far in the video, just know that this information is going to help you a lot in not allowing people to brainwash you. Believe it or not, there's a lot of people around you that brainwash you. The reason that I'm reading these books is because of gang stalking. Gang stalking is literal brainwashing. So I don't need to rephrase this because it is literally being said right here, right before I started reading that. Okay. So the summary, we already read it. We literally just got summarized by the book before reading it. Okay. Oh, okay. So the rephrasing, I don't have to do it because it's there. Let's see now. The pattern of Koestler's life underwent a total change, and he remained a loyal communist until 6 years later, when he experienced an equally intense reconversion. In The God That Failed. The God That Failed is a book, I think. Oh, so The God That Failed is a collection of 6 essays from 1949. Arthur Koestler is mentioned here. The common theme of the essays is the author's disillusionment with and abandonment of communism. The phenomena were seen to follow a series of emotional shocks when captured and imprisoned during the Spanish Civil War. The experiences responsible for this change were fear, pity, and a third one, more difficult to describe. Fear, not of death, but of torture and humiliation, and the more unpleasant forms of dying. And finally, a condition of mind usually referred to in terms borrowed from the vocabulary of mysticism, which would present itself at unexpected moments and induce a state of inner peace, which I have known neither before nor since. In The Invisible Writing, he also says, The Invisible Writing, I think it's an essay. On the day when Sir Peter Chalmers and I were arrested, there had been 3 occasions when I believed my execution was imminent. On all 3 occasions, I had benefited from the well-known phenomenon of a split consciousness, a dreamlike, dazed self-estrangement, which separated the conscious self from the acting self, the former becoming a detached observer, the latter an automaton, while the air hums in one's ears as in the hollow of a seashell. Much worse was another episode on the same day, being photographed for the Rogues Gallery against a wall in the street, hands tied in the midst of a hostile crowd. This last incident had revived catastrophic panic feelings experienced during a surgical operation in his childhood, Koestler reports. This, together with the other events of the same day and of the next 3 days with their mass executions, had apparently caused a loosening up and displacement of psychic strata. Okay, what's psychic strata? So, the concept of psychic strata isn't a standard term in mainstream psychology or neuroscience, says Mr. Gemini. It is more likely to be found in esoteric or spiritual contexts. Some spiritual or metaphysical systems might use psychic strata to describe layers of consciousness or energy within the human psyche. These layers could represent different levels of awareness, vibration, or access to higher states of being. Psychoanalytic schools. Certain schools of psychoanalysis, particularly those with a more Jungian or depth psychological orientation, might utilize a concept similar to strata to describe the layered nature of the unconscious mind. In general, the idea of strata implies a layered structure, and when applied to the psyche, it suggests that the mind is not a single monolithic entity, but rather a complex system with different levels of depth. Psychic strata close to rock bottom, a softening of resistances and rearrangement of structures, which lay them temporarily open to that new type of experience that I am leading up to. These clinical observations become still more interesting when he gives, in non-religious terms, the same sort of mystical experience that floods the literature of religious conversion. The fact is that mystical experiences, like sudden conversions, do not always arise from purely religious influences and stresses. They can sometimes be induced by chemical means, such as, for instance, mescaline, ether, and laughing gas. That's fucking crazy. Koestler's detailed accounts of his 2 conversions and the quasi-mystical experiences that accompany the second of these show how varied are the emotional and physiological stresses that can help towards conversion. His stresses include a severe alcoholic hangover, a broken down car, heavy financial loss, a disagreeable sexual entanglement, civil war capture, threats of sudden death by shooting, and the revival of a childhood panic. In each case, the new troubles were heaped on to the old until their combined weight perhaps proved more than could be tolerated by his nervous system, and a change in brain patterns seemed to have occurred. Koestler's The Invisible Writing should be read for a full description of his non-religious or mystical or of his non-religious, mystical, or dream-like type of experience in prison. Then I was floating on my back in a river of peace, under bridges of silence. It came from nowhere and flowed nowhere. Then there was no river and no I. I had ceased to exist. He also says, the coming back to the lower order of reality I found to be gradual, like waking up from anesthesia. Whether the experience had lasted for a few minutes or an hour, I never knew. In the beginning, it occurred two or even three times a week. Then the intervals became longer. It could never be voluntarily induced. After my liberation, it occurred at even longer intervals, perhaps once or twice in a year. But by that time, the groundwork for a change of personality was completed. He wrote that. He himself experienced a change of personality and he wrote about it. To me, that's fucking nuts. Experiences of this sort can be induced by a wide range of stresses on the brain. What is more, feelings of divine possession and subsequent conversion to a religious faith can be helped on by the use of many types of physiological stimuli. It should be more widely known that electrical recordings of the human brain show that it is particularly sensitive to rhythmic stimulation by percussion and bright light, among other things. And certain rates of rhythm can build up recordable abnormalities of brain function and explosive states of tension sufficient even to produce convulsive fits in predisposed subjects. It is said, like I have read on other places, that bright lights and a lot of weird sounds confuse people. And guess what happens in gang stalking? Headlights, a lot of bangs, a lot of noises, and a lot of lights in gang stalking. In gang stalking, I continuously had people literally shining flashlights on my fucking eyes at the auto parts store, like a lot of times. So that actually works. Some people can be persuaded to dance in time with such rhythms until they collapse in exhaustion. Furthermore, it is easier to disorganize the normal function of the brain by attacking it simultaneously with several strong rhythms played in different tempos. This leads on to protective inhibition, either rapidly in the weak inhibitory temperament or after a prolonged period of excitement in the strong excitatory one. So if this is your first video of this series, you are not going to understand what protective inhibition is. You're not going to understand what weak inhibitory temperament or strong excitatory one. So protective inhibition is where your mind just kind of collapses in order for you to not overheat, where there's a lot of things going on in your brain and your brain is it kind of just gives up trying to understand them. Then weak inhibitory temperament is when someone has a temperament that gets into protective inhibition really easily. And strong excitatory one is when someone gets aroused really strongly. Like when someone gets upset, like if someone is being confused, they don't go into protective inhibition. They go into a strong excitatory. So they're polar opposites. We cover this in chapter 1 of this series. So check chapter 1, and there we cover that. These were terms, by the way, coined by Parlov. Now, rhythmic drumming is found in the ceremonies of many primitive religions all over the world. The accompanying excitement in dancing is also maintained until the same point of physical and emotional collapse has been reached. Alcohol and other drugs are often used to heighten the excitement of religious dancers, and this too hastens the breakdown. After which, feelings of being freed from sin and evil dispositions and of starting life anew may occur. Belief in divine possessions is very common at such times, and so is the mystical trance, essentially similar to that experienced by so many Christian and other saints in cramped cells or under martyrdom, and vouchsafed to Koestler when threatened with shooting, and Koestler when threatened with shooting by the Franco forces. So practically here it's saying that in ceremonies In religious ceremonies, there's liquor, there is drumming, there's a lot of dancing, people are trying to get tired, there's drugs, and then there is this point where they get into a trance state in which the religious conversion happens. This same thing, this divine possession, is also common by a lot of Christians and saints that have been in cramped cells or that have been martyrs. Like Koestler, when he was threatened with shooting by the Franco forces. The voodoo cult in Haiti shows with what ease suggestibility can be increased by subjecting the brain to severe physiological stresses. Voodoo has numerous deities, or loa, some of them African tribal gods, brought to the West Indies by slaves, some of them saints whom Catholic priests later taught the slaves to invoke. The loa are believed to descend and take possession of a person, usually while he or she is dancing to the drums. The possessed person then behaves as the particular deity should behave, the different habits of loa being a matter of tradition, as with soldiers who continue to fight after being temporarily stunned by an explosion, or football players who get kicked on the head in the early stages of an exciting match, then possessed have no recollection when they come to themselves again an hour or so later of what has seemed to others an intelligent and effective performance. The case of men and women who have been worked up into a state of suggestibility by voodoo drumming shows the power of such methods. Though apparently unconscious, they carry out all the detailed behavior expected of the particular deity by which they believe themselves possessed. A voodoo priest increases excitement and suggestibility by altering the loudness and rhythms of the drums, just as in a religious snake handling cult, which I observed myself in the United States. The preacher used the tempo and volume of singing and hand clapping to intensify the religious enthusiasm, and emotional disruption was finally induced by thrusting live poisonous snakes into their hands. After a terminal collapse into stupor, both groups of participants may awake with a sense of spiritual rebirth. In 1949, Maya Deren went to Haiti on a Guggenheim Fellowship to study and film Haitian dancing. In The Divine Horseman, she has published a detailed account of the physiological and psychological effects of the drumming on her own brain, ending in her apparent possession by Urzuli, the goddess of love. She tells how the drums gradually induced uncontrollable bodily movement until, as a climax, she felt possession coming on her. She wrote, "My skull is a drum. Each great beat drives that leg like the point of a stake into the ground. The singing is at my very ear, inside my head. This sound will drown me. Why don't they stop? Why don't they stop? I cannot wrench the leg free. I am caught in this cylinder, this well of sound. There is nothing anywhere except this. There is no way out. The white darkness moves up the veins of my leg like a swift tide, rising. It's a great force which I cannot sustain or contain, which surely will burst my skin. It is too much, too bright, too white for me. This is its darkness. Mercy, I scream within me. I hear it echoed by the voices, shrill and unearthly. Urzuli, the bright darkness floods up through my body, reaches my head, engulfs me. I am sucked down and exploded upward at once. That is all." She also tries to convey some of the strange feelings and impressions that came upon her while dancing in a trance around the peristyle of the Voodooan meeting house, behaving as the goddess Urzuli is supposed to behave on such occasion. If the earth is a sphere, then the abyss below the earth is also its heavens, and the difference between them is no more than time, the time of the earth's turning, if the earth is a vast horizontal surface. Such feelings expressed in ordinary language are incomprehensible and even nonsensical to readers who have never experienced the paradoxical, ultra-paradoxical phases of brain activity induced by intolerable stress. White darkness, for instance, makes no more sense to them than would the intense mystical joy excited by flagellation. Flagellation is like the flogging. Maya Deren enjoyed feelings of spiritual rebirth as she recovered from her trance. how clear the world looks in this first twilight, how purely formed it is, without, for the moment, the shadow of meaning, as the souls of the dead did, so have I, too, come back, I have returned. These experiences which changed her plans for the future, as well as her outlook on voodoo, also show what may happen to those who try to fight rather than avoid these mechanistic processes by too strong an exercise of willpower. The emotion expended in the effort sometimes only hastens their breakdown. Maya Deren describes how she was caught in this way. Just before her possession, she had felt herself becoming vulnerable to the drumming and turned her back on the dancers, but then rejoined them from a proud sense of professional duty. For I know that today the drums, the singing, the movements, these may catch me also. Turn away would be a cowardice. I could resist, but I must not escape, and I can resist best. I think to myself, if I put aside the fears and nervousness, if instead of suspecting my vulnerability, I set myself embracing competition with all this which would compel me towards authority. But in the end, she found herself forced to submit. With great blow, the drum unites us once more upon the point of the left leg. Why did she mention left leg? You know, I don't know if there's any other type of meaning of that shit, but my gang stalking sensations were always on my left leg. On my left foot actually. That's fucking weird. What the fuck? If anyone knows anything about left leg, and if there's any type of saying that talks about the left leg that I'm not understanding, please let me know and write it in the comments. Also, you need to subscribe right now. Like right now, okay? Alright, so the white darkness starts to shoot up. I wrench my foot free, but the effect catapults me across what seems a vast distance, and I come to rest upon a firmness of arms and bodies, which would hold me up. With every muscle I pull loose, and again plunge across a vast space, and once more am no sooner poised in balance than my leg roots. So it goes, the leg fixed, then wrenched loose. One long fall across space, the rooting of the leg again. For how long? How many times? I cannot know. This is very important. Listen, the best way to avoid possession or indoctrination, conversion, in all similar conditions is to avoid getting emotionally involved in the proceedings. To fears and anger or contempt for the voodoo priest or for the religious snake handler may be as dangerous as to quake with fear when one or the other inaugurates a meeting. Horace Walpole's emotionally detached attitude to John Wesley's preaching, quoted by Knox, was the one most likely to preserve him from sanctification. So an emotionally detached attitude is most likely to preserve you, to keeping you from any type of conversion. Wesley was as evidently an actor as Garrick. He spoke his sermon, but so fast and with so little accent that I am sure he has often uttered it, for it was like a lesson. There were parts and eloquence on it, but towards the end he exalted his voice and acted very ugly enthusiasm. ¿Mother?
¿Sacaste las pilas?
No, ¿por qué le vamos a sacar las pilas?
Te iba a dar pegado con la tele. Y ahorita que fui, estaba tirado y estaba abierto.
¿Yo por qué lo voy a abrir? But no fui yo. But would Walpole have been able to maintain this attitude if Wesley had visited Strawberry Hill with a force of army drummers, some of whom might be his sanctified converts, to overwhelm him with the ruffles and double flams? Parlow showed that when new behavior patterns were implanted in his dogs, they would become sensitized to the particular stimuli associated with this change. It can be the same human beings. Maya Deren experienced 7 or 8 attacks of possession, from which it sometimes took her as much as 4 hours to regain consciousness. She found it more and more easy to respond to the drums and the dancing, and emphasizes in her account the sense of being overwhelmed by a transcendent force.